Make a habit of empathy, to recognize ourselves in each other.
My name is Newt Bailey. I work here in the San Francisco Bay Area as a nonviolent communication trainer and as a mediator, helping people with conflicts, working with couples and families and organizations, and also doing some time in prison, working in prison on 1 day a week to teach inmates about nonviolent communication. What it means to me really is about giving, I won't say my full attention, but giving an unusual amount of attention to the person speaking, whoever I'm listening to, speaking with. And the only reason, commonly people will often say giving my full attention to that person, but I notice that there's something included in empathy for me, which is I have to maintain enough attention on myself to notice whether or not I'm starting to take more interest in my own opinions, or what I'm going to say back to them, or how I'm going to defend myself, or what I'm going to have for dinner, or whatever it is. And so there's definitely some presence with myself so that I can just let those things blow by and put my attention back on the person speaking, what's important to them, why are they talking to me, how are they feeling. Self-empathy is something which has been one of the biggest it's sort of incredible components for me in using nonviolent communication, just to allow myself to stop in the middle of a conversation, especially a tense conversation, to check in, how am I actually doing at this moment, and what do I want out of this? I'm about to open my mouth to speak again. Why am I about to open my mouth to speak again? What's going on for me? And as my ex-wife will tell you, that makes me a very different person to communicate with now than I was, 5 or 6 years ago.
And if you describe the physical felt sensation of empathy, what does empathy feel like?
Well, in the way that I experience it, there's a lot of attention that I put onto my body, especially. I guess I do a lot of noticing what's going on with my heart. And it could be a very practical thing, like do I find myself clenching up or something, or tightening in my chest? Do I find myself feeling expansive? And actually noticing what's happening in my body, because that's a great cue to whether or not I'm present. And for me, empathy is all about being present with what's happening. So there's a real feeling of awareness, I guess, of what's happening, especially in my chest, especially in the region of my heart. That's a big part of it. I have to say that I must confess, when I'm speaking about empathy metaphorically, I use the surfing metaphor, so I like it a lot, and so that's the one which actually springs to my mind.
Can you explain it, what it means?
Yeah, I mean, the way I use it is that if you were to ask a surfer why they surf, they'd probably tell you because it's fun, they enjoy it, something like that. And if you said to them, well, are you surfing in order to get the wave to change direction, or to work out where the wave is coming from, or where it used to be, or why it turned out the way it did, they would look at you very confusedly. No, that's not why I'm surfing. And for me, when you're empathizing with someone, it's almost like you're riding the wave of their experience. And you're staying with them, just in the same way that a surfer stays with a wave. And you're doing it for the joy of doing it, for the joy of connecting with another human being. And you're not doing it because you're trying to lead them somewhere. You're not doing it because you're trying to analyze where they're coming from or how they turned out this way. You're not trying to redirect or change what's going on. So that's the way I use that metaphor. And also there's another thing about it which I'd like to say, which is that sometimes there are some waves which can be a little hard for you to ride. And if your surfing is not up to that particular wave, it's maybe a good idea for you to go back into the beach and let someone else surf that wave. And that's an additional part of the metaphor that I like, that you surf when it's enjoyable for you to surf, and if it starts to feel dangerous or scary or uncomfortable for you to be empathizing with that person riding that wave, then you stop. That's another part of the metaphor that I like. Well, one story I like is about talking with my partner, and who was not used to, when we were first together, was definitely not used to receiving empathy in the way I was trying to do it. And I was also learning. And I think she found it quite unwelcome. She was quite unsettled by being asked questions about what is it exactly that you mean, or where are you coming from, how are you feeling, what is it that you're needing. And I would go so far as to say she didn't enjoy it at all. And that ran us into some very confusing conversations where I just didn't get it. Like, I'm trying to do this thing where I'm trying to care about what's happening for my partner, and yet she seems to not be enjoying this at all. And thankfully, somewhere in the middle of that, I went to a workshop with Marshall Rosenberg, and he happened to mention quite briefly the power of silent empathy. Didn't spend a lot of time on it because a silent workshop is not maybe all that fascinating for people to watch, but it was enough. And so when I went back to my relationship, I started toying with, what if I just keep all of my empathy in my own head for my partner? I won't ask her any questions. I'll just be figuring it out for myself. Why is she saying this? What's up? What's important? And from then on, it seemed like we got on way better. A lot of the difficulties didn't happen anymore. And then what was even more remarkable was that I guess somehow maybe that was a way of being caring without doing something that she felt was an imposition upon her or a demand upon her to respond. And I would very often find that within a half an hour or an hour, she would be telling me all of the things which she might have told me if I'd been asking her the questions I'd kept to myself. Somehow having that space, just being received to talk, she'd then figure out some extra things to tell me about what was going on. So that was a real insight for me on you don't have to speak. It can sometimes be very useful to speak when you're empathizing, but it's not always essential, and nor is it always the most useful thing for yourself or the other person. I have an awful lot of fun moments of training people in NVC. One very happy moment for me was when a man who was separated from his wife said to me, how can I use any of this nonviolent communication? She won't answer my calls. She won't respond to anything I do, letters, nothing. So I don't get to communicate with her. So how is this useful to me? And he was an avid student. He wanted to use this. So, and I said to him, there are two things which you can still do, even if she doesn't contact you at all. The one is you can empathize with yourself. The other one is you can empathize with her. Just wonder what's going on for her. Ask yourself the questions. Take your mind off what's wrong with her, what you think is wrong with her, what you think is wrong with you, what you think is wrong with the situation, that kind of thinking. And just put your attention on what is it that you really want out of this, and what do you imagine she really wants out of this. And then, by chance, she got in touch with him a couple of weeks later, and he then spoke to me shortly after this, and he said, it was amazing, because I'd been putting all of my attention on what I wanted and what I thought she might want. It didn't matter what she said to me, which would normally have maybe caused me to respond with anger or frustration or something, and that's totally what she was expecting. I could see it in her face, because that's how I've always been. I didn't respond that way, because that's not where my mind had been. And the conversation was amazing, and she was really surprised by it, and it came out way better than I could have possibly imagined, and things are going forward in a good way now. So that's just one example of many, of a particularly happy moment. I think the outcomes for me are around, there's one very simple one, which is people can spend a lot less time kind of arguing in circles about things and getting stuck in repetitive patterns. And they can free up a lot of time and energy for actually enjoying life, playing, coming up with creative solutions to things. So, and that can be on a very local level of you with your partner or your son or someone. And it can be on a global level of, which I think is essential, of people freeing up energy to solve global problems and not kind of spend all their time with infighting and politics and differences and conflicts that they don't know how to work out, but getting on with what it is that they actually want to achieve. Freeing up the energy so that you can actually put your energy and time into making things happen, which will last and which people can all be on board with, rather than spending your time and energy just kind of tussling and fighting and going in circles, which so often happens,